Summarising the career of the Big Red Machine was never going to be an easy job in just one interview, and while many people might not have been looking forward to this one quite as much as perhaps they were looking forward to, say, The Undertaker or Goldberg featuring on Stone Cold's Broken Skull Sessions podcast, nevertheless, this was still good viewing, and it was very important for all those Kane fans out there. Now, unlike both The Undertaker and the Bill Goldberg podcast, this podcast about Kane didn't come after what you might call a major pay-per-view. That's not to give any knock or disrespect to NXT UK, but it did follow NXT TakeOver Blackpool 2, or TakeOver 2 Blackpool, however you want to put that. So maybe possibly not given quite as much of a big push for the American fans who'd probably be paying fast attention to those other pay-per-views, but still, this was still a big deal. But a man who's been in the business for as long as Kane has was always going to have some very interesting stories to tell. Kane and Austin covered all of his career from the very humble beginnings of his gimmick all the way through to his Inferno match with The Undertaker and all the tiny little specific additions of the gimmick moving forward right up until his unmasking in 2003. However, we know you're busy, so call us Flash, because we've done the hard work so you don't have to. And we combed all the way through all the hell, fire and brimstone of the Kane podcast with Stone Cold to get you all those tiny little tidbits that you can tell your friends in the pub and make them all really happy. My name is Adam Nicholas, and these are 10 things we learned from Kane on Stone Cold's Broken Skull Sessions podcast. Number 10, Isaac Yankem was an old Bobby Heenan joke. Bobby Heenan was long gone from the WWF by the time that Glenn Jacobs debuted as Isaac Yankem DDS, but his legacy did live on through this gimmick. According to Kane, his evil dentist gimmick came from somebody on the creative team, quite possibly Bruce Pritchard, who's mentioned as much on his very own podcast, was remembering one of Bobby Heenan's old jokes that he used to say, where he'd wander in the room and say, "I've got an appointment with my dentist, I Yankem," as in, there's his name tag, I.Yankem. That was the gist of the brain's wisecracking. To be fair, it seems like it must have been a good one because it stuck with quite a few people in the company long after he had left. And as such, in typical WWE fashion, WWE backstage fashion in particular, they just couldn't resist making a character out of it. And who was the lucky person who got to do it? It was Kane. The big guy thought it was Vince McMahon's way of testing him out, so unlike most of his patients, decided to keep his mouth shut. Number 9, Vader's QA troubles almost led to his debut. That's gotta be Kane! Yes, nobody who watched it will ever forget Kane's debut back in 1997. The creepy music, his emotionless appearance, the big red mask, his big red ass, and of course Vince McMahon's absolutely timeless call on commentary makes this a moment that you can literally never forget. And to be fair, WWE will play it so many times over and over again, you'd be hard pressed to. And yet, all that history could have been very different had Vincent Kennedy McMahon, of all people, not shown a tiny bit of restraint. Around 6 months before his debut, Kane was almost called up as a replacement for Vader in his feud with The Undertaker. Vader had got himself into a spot of trouble with the authorities in Kuwait during a WWF house tour in April 1997. This meant that he couldn't leave the country, and bigger yet, I'm sure in Vince McMahon's eyes, it meant that his beloved Undertaker didn't have an opponent for house shows. Kane very nearly got the nod, but not as Undertaker's masked brother. He almost bagged the role as another kind of masked character, Unabomber, perhaps, anybody? But actually Vince McMahon on this rare occasion decided that Kane had far more potential than just being a last-minute placeholder for Vader and doing a few quick jobs to The Undertaker. Number 8, fake Diesel gave Kane his confidence back. The fake Diesel and fake Razor Ramon characters that were introduced in 1996 have obviously been subject to a lot of ridicule since they first debuted. However, if you ask Michael Hamflett, he would probably sell at least one of his children just to spend a day walking around in Big Daddy Cool's shoes. Isn't that right, Michael? However, it may surprise some of you in particular. Yes, you. Knock, knock. Hello, I'm looking at you. I see you. But it may surprise you to know that Kane was relishing the opportunity to play the fake Diesel character because it was an opportunity to show Vince McMahon that he was very much on board, he was very much a member of the team, he was very much for the cause, but more importantly, it was a chance to give Kane some of his confidence back. Before taking on the role of Diesel, Kane was actually at a period of really crushed self-confidence. The whole Isaac Yankem DDS deal had kind of knocked him back a little bit. Becoming Diesel and studying Nash's mannerisms and getting all of his likenesses down to a T meant he could actually be the big man that he was, rather than just be Bret Hart's bump machine. Now, obviously, with a bit of hindsight, it perhaps didn't quite work out the way that he thought it would. However, the one thing it did do was bring Kane's confidence back. And if anything else, if he could keep a straight face while pretending to be Kevin Nash on national television, the sky was the limit. Number 7, Kane's eyes were lifted from Marilyn Manson. During Kane's earlier years, one of the character's most striking features was that one white eye that he had. Do you remember that? Where it was all white, but it had this tiny little black dot in the middle of it. Very freaky, very creepy, and as he looked at you down the camera lens, I don't know about you, but it made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. Well, that design was very much deliberate, and it was lifted directly off shock rocker Marilyn Manson, who of course it was. Just take one look at the eyes, and it's absolutely plain to see. And that all came together right in time for Kane's debut at In Your House Bad Blood in October 1997. The even more surprising little tidbit here is that it was Jim Ross, of all people, who came up with the idea of including the white eye on Kane as a way to kind of strip down all of his human emotion. He'd spotted a picture of Manson in a magazine and was absolutely fascinated by the way that one weird little eye, probably along with all the other things that Manson was employing, managed to sap him of all human emotion. You see, he doesn't just know his barbecue sauce, he's also got an eye for detail, eh? An eye for detail? Yeah. Oh, the jokes are coming thick and fast. Blink and you'll miss him. Number 6, his Saint Bernard inspired the trademark head tilt. One of the other traits that Kane developed was a simple head tilt, like this, that was apparently meant to convey intelligence without him having to speak. Oh, I tell you what, I'd be uncomfortable doing that all the time. By occasionally dropping his head to one side, Kane hoped that he'd be able to sort of convey some emotion in matches and promos without obviously having to say any words, because at the time, that was an absolute no-go, although we all remember this, don't we? And of all the great advice from all the great wrestlers that he probably crossed paths with along the road, down the road, up the road, and all the other roads that you might possibly think of, where do you think this gimmick came from? Do you think it came from Vince McMahon? From Jim Ross? From his friends, his foes, maybe his mum and dad? I don't know, the butcher down the road? A guy who's got really bad equilibrium in his ears? No, it wasn't any of those people. It was his dog. Kane's Saint Bernard would tilt its head to the side whenever they were communicating, whether it was about walkies or tummy rubs or just food in general, whatever you want. And that was his way of understanding his owner. He would always tilt his head to kind of say, yeah, I get what you're saying. I want whatever it is you're offering. Now, obviously, his dog couldn't speak English, but what a tidbit that would have been if that had dropped out on the podcast. Kane has talking dog. I can see the clicks now. But as it happens, it was just the way that he and his pooch used to talk to one another, if you like. And that's also sweet, but also quite a clever little thing to pick up from the dog, to be honest. Like Ace Ventura with the birds and all that. I'm going to move on. Bruce Pritchard once said that he thought that Kane's head tilts were actually more effective than most of the people's promos that they were cutting at the time, because they really gave the people something to hang on to, and it really kind of, I don't know, it was something you could all relate to when it came down the screen, and let's be honest, who could deny it? Although now that I'm thinking about it, does that mean that all this time Kane just wanted a tummy rub or a walk? Weird. Number 5, an S&M place made Kane's masks. So Kane's mask had to be robust, it had to be breathable, and it had to be comfortable to wear. And meeting those particular requirements was quite difficult for WWF's wardrobe department at the time. So instead of struggling through it and trying to continually come up with a brand new mask that was taking more time, that was wasting everybody's schedules, they decided to seek some professional help on the matter. And where do you go when you need professional help about how to make masks? Of course, you go to an S&M place. Now I know what you're thinking, because I thought the same thing. Does this mean there was some Kane-themed butt plugs and whips, perhaps? Something along those lines? Well, funnily enough, that didn't pop up during the Mayor of Knox County's podcast with Stone Cold Steve Austin. However, while he didn't say that wasn't the case, he didn't say it wasn't not the case, eh? So you're saying there's a chance? With regard to his masks, Kane also told Austin that he had a bunch of different ones. He had one specific mask that he would keep for TV appearances, while he'd keep a bunch of older ones that he'd just use for house shows and the like. And on top of that, something I never really thought about myself, although when you look back at pictures, it must have been a pain in the ass. Kane used to have to get backstage after every match and untangle his hair from his mask, which he says took around 30 minutes each time. Bah, what a big red pain in the ass. Now, the name didn't appear on the podcast, but it was said that WWF did have a contract with this S&M place, as they were to keep supplying them mask after mask after mask. So if anything, it kind of worked out for everybody, really, didn't it? And whether Vince McMahon got some extra bonuses on top of that, well, we'll never know. Number 4, his pyro was the Undertaker's idea. Now, it was always such a powerful visual when Kane would raise his arms in the centre of the ring and then drop them down as the flames would burst up around him. Phew, tell you what. Memories. No kid grew up in the late 90s without watching that on the TV, motioning along as it was happening, all lifting their arms and dropping them at the same time, and wishing just that one time that the pyro would come up at your command, which would have been weird inside your house and probably would have caused an accident. But that is not the point. The point is, this was a genius idea that people liked and it was super cool. But it wasn't Kane's idea, would you believe? Who do you think came up with this one? No, it wasn't his dog, funnily enough, because his dog had way more important things on his mind, like food, walkies, and etc., etc. It was, in fact, the Undertaker. The dead man pitched this as the complete opposite to his own entrance. Now, when you think about it, he might be dark in presence, but whenever the dead man comes up to the ring and he gets on the steps, what does he do? He shuts his eyes or does the weird roll back thing, arms go up, and of course, all the light comes up, doesn't it? Well, this was the complete opposite of that. Whenever Kane did this and pulled down, the fires of hell came up and everything was red before the Fiend was trying to make it popular anyway. As you can imagine, Kane absolutely loved the gimmick, as did everybody backstage, Vince McMahon and the Pyro department in particular, because they've got to get that dollar to feed their little Pyro kids and all that kind of thing. But either way, this was more importantly another great addition to Kane's character. It added another layer of depth to him. It was another great identifiable gimmick, which is what they wanted for him most importantly, given the fact he couldn't actually speak at all and all he had really at this point was a head tilt and some arms going up. But most importantly, out of all of these things, it gave him a perfect gimmick that would kind of tie him to The Undertaker in a weird sort of way. The complete antithesis of one another, which would play out, of course, on the screen much later on. Number 3, his Inferno match rehearsal was cancelled. Just 24 hours before working their Inferno match at Unforgiven 1998, Kane and The Undertaker were sat having a little chat about what they were going to do at rehearsals that night. They were on their way to a WWF house show at the time, but were absolutely horrified when they found out that the limousine driver, that's right, Kane and the dead man were in a limousine. That's a whole other story, but they found out the limousine driver had been driving in the wrong direction for 2 hours. They were late by the time they reached the building for the show, and Kane had to rush in, work a 30-second little stint with Vader, and then fly back out, jump back in the limousine, and head straight off. By that point, it was way too late for any rehearsals, so they had to just get in the car, head off, cancel rehearsals, and had zero preparation before their match the following night. The only rehearsal Kane got for any of this match was where the stuntman practiced setting his arm on fire. We all remember how that went. Very interesting indeed, just so you would know whether or not that would work for later on. But other than that, they went into this entire match completely blind. Seriously, man, that is terrifying. Number 2, Paul Bearer's
Kane can drive!
rib. Now, during the interview with Austin, it's fair to say Kane's eyes very nearly teared up a little bit when he was talking about Paul Bearer. Of course, the man wasn't just a mentor to Kane in the ring, he was so much more than that. But funnily enough, while they were working together, Paul Bearer wanted Kane to focus specifically on his character, on his work, and preparing for his matches and his promos, which is pretty great, to be honest. That meant that Paul Bearer was happy to drive for him, that meant that Paul Bearer was happy to sort hotels for him, and it also meant that Paul Bearer was happy to maybe even cook for him, sort food, all that kind of thing. What a lovely guy. Now that gave Kane time to focus on all of his actual performances, and as nice as that is, and that is really lovely, in fairness, all good pals, and I mean that, all good pals, have got a rib or two in them, and funnily enough, Paul Bearer was no different. One time, and I just need you to take 2 seconds to picture this visual because it's filling me full of joy as we speak. The two of them were riding down a road together in a red Cadillac, Kane and Paul Bearer in a red Cadillac. That's one thing. But Kane, obviously because nobody knew who Glenn Jacobs was, he had to make sure that he kept his identity secret. So, of course, as most people do, you put something on to hide your face. So imagine it, there they are driving down the road, red Cadillac, big guy, another big guy, and one of them is wearing a ski mask on his head. I mean, just picture that for a second. A red Cadillac, a man in a ski mask, just driving down the road, just chilling down the road. Jesus. Now, obviously, he didn't wear the traditional red and black mask because that would have drawn too much attention, and 9 times out of 10, they were driving towards busy arenas or heading towards other busy kind of areas. On this particular occasion, though, Paul Bearer decided he'd have himself a bit of a chuckle at Kane's expense, because why not? Everything seems so serious when a man's driving around in a red Cadillac and a ski mask. Bearer decided to roll down the windows of the Cadillac, turn to a bunch of fans who were standing out there and shout, "It's a miracle! Kane can drive! Woo!" As you can imagine, that attracted quite a bit of attention, considering Paul Bearer was there with a guy in a ski mask who everybody's probably pretty sure at this point was Kane. The red Cadillac might have been a giveaway. Kane said he was flustered at the time, but now that he looks back on these moments, he looks back at them fondly, as you can imagine, because, let's face it, that's the kind of thing you want to remember, isn't it? Being in a ski mask, being in a red... I'm sorry, it's just such a weird visual. And number 1, how Kane rationalised unmasking. One of the big final moments that Austin and Kane focused on during the podcast was the eventual unmasking of Kane in 2003. And of course, ever the great host, Austin wanted to know if unmasking had any kind of effect on Kane's character and his desire to continue playing the character, and apparently it did. But not a negative one. Apparently, it was a positive one. According to Jacobs, he'd been working on exaggerated facial expressions underneath the mask the whole time that he was Kane, so now that he'd had indeed been unmasked to the world, he was ready to show them what he could do with his face. And what a lovely face it is as well. Unmasking meant he didn't have anything to hide behind anymore. The gimmick's original superhero overcoming his inadequacies, as Vince McMahon once put it, was now stripped bare, and there was absolutely nowhere for Kane to hide. One of the things they talked about at length during promos was how Kane had all these horrible scars and burns on his face. So to rationalise these sort of scars on his face and all these horrible disfiguring that Kane had spoken about, Jacobs decided that the way to do that was to consider himself to have all these mental scars instead, these deep, harrowing moments that he's kept inside that he's believed to have portrayed on the outside, but actually it was all in his head. Now, I know a lot of people might have thought that was a cop-out at the time, probably myself included, because you're like, hey, where's all these scars, buddy? You just got a bit of black makeup on your face and half your hair. Look like Sven-Goran Eriksson. But all in all, if you actually look back at it, it's quite a nuanced little take, that really, isn't it? One very unlike WWE, to say the least, and if only they'd spent a little bit more time focusing on that like they do everything else in the modern era, maybe that would have been a bit clearer. Nevertheless, the unmasking was far from a negative in Jacob's eyes, and it gave him the opportunity to show the rest of the world, well, just how crazy he could actually be without a mask. And there you have it. That's all the things we learned from Kane's appearance on Stone Cold's podcast. Let us know your thoughts on all of these in the comments down below. And don't forget, of course, to like, share, and subscribe. You can find the original article for this at whatculture.com/WWE. That's by Jamie Kennedy. It's a good read. Give it a read. I had to change it all around for this whole script, so I know exactly what it says, but you will enjoy it too. You can follow What Culture on Twitter at WhatCultureWWE. You can follow me on Twitter at It's Adam Nicholas, or if you just want some more videos, well, guess what? You're in luck, because there's just a couple over here somewhere. At least I hope there is. Who knows? Anyway, my name's Adam Nicholas, and I will see you next time.